My name is Bianca, and for as long as I can remember, I've been called the strong one. Not because I chose it, but because my family decided that was who I had to be. Before I tell you how that role shaped my entire life, and how it nearly destroyed me, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because when the truth finally came out, my family realized they never really knew me at all. I still remember the first time it really sank in. I was about 7 years old, sitting on the floor of our living room with a scraped knee after falling off my bike. Tears burned in my eyes as I tried not to sob too loudly. My mother glanced at me, shook her head, and said, "Come on, Bianca, you're strong. Don't cry. Show your sister how to be tough." Meanwhile, my younger sister Elena could so much as bump her elbow, and both of my parents would rush across the room with ice packs, kisses, and endless words of comfort. She was the fragile one, the delicate one. She got softness. I got responsibility. That pattern never changed as we grew older. School projects? Bianca can handle it. Household chores? Bianca will take care of it. When Elena forgot her homework, my parents called the teacher to smooth things over. When I forgot mine once, my father's voice thundered, "I expected better from you." It wasn't just words, it was the way they looked at me, like my worth depended on never failing, never needing, never asking. If Elena received a B in school, she was rewarded with ice cream and hugs. When I came home with straight A's, I was told, "That's what we expect from you, Bianca." On the outside, I learned to wear that role like armor. I became self-reliant, organized, and dependable. The one no one worried about, because apparently I didn't need worrying. On the inside, though, I grew tired. Tired of being invisible unless I was achieving something. Tired of being compared to Elena, whose smallest accomplishments were celebrated like victories while mine were brushed aside as obligations. As a teenager, I started to realize how deeply unfair it was. But whenever I tried to point it out, the answer was always the same. "You're stronger, Bianca. You can handle it." Those words haunted me. They were supposed to be praise, but to me, they felt like chains. And yet, I carried them. Through high school, through college, through every step of becoming the independent woman my parents always insisted I be. Because even if the role was suffocating, it was all I had ever known. I didn't realize then that being the strong one wasn't strength at all. It was silence. It was swallowing my own needs so no one else had to see them. It was learning to live without help, because help was never offered. Looking back, I can see that the seeds of everything that came later, the collapse, the loneliness, the anger, were planted right there in my childhood. In every moment, my parents told me to handle it, while Elena was shielded from the smallest discomfort. And the cruel irony is that I did handle it. I learned to survive. But survival and being seen are not the same thing. And for most of my life, I was unseen. By the time I turned 18, there was no question about how my life would unfold. My parents had made it clear without ever saying it directly, Bianca doesn't need help. Bianca knows how to take care of herself. So I did. While Elena took her time exploring options after high school, I went straight into college with a part-time job already lined up. I remember the sting of moving day. Elena cried when she left home for the first time years later, my mother clinging to her as though she were sending a child off to war. But when I moved into my dorm, my parents gave me a quick hug, loaded my boxes into the trunk, and drove away before I had even unpacked the last one. "Call us if you need anything," my father said as they left. But there was no real expectation that I would. Everyone knew I wouldn't. College was a blur of exhaustion and determination. I studied marketing because it was practical, stable, something I could build a career on. But books weren't enough. I needed rent money, tuition money, grocery money. So I juggled 3 jobs: answering phones in the campus office, tutoring freshmen in English, and waiting tables on weekends. There were nights I fell asleep over textbooks, my head resting on highlighted paragraphs, my alarm dragging me back up before dawn. When my GPA came back at 3.8, I thought maybe this would be the moment my parents would beam with pride. Instead, my mother said, "See? That's why we never worried about you." And my father added, "That's what being reliable looks like." I smiled through the call, but inside, The word reliable felt like a leash tightening around my throat. Meanwhile, Elena stayed at home for years, drifting between part-time retail jobs and art classes that never led anywhere. My parents carried her bills, bought her a used car, and paid for trips she claimed were for inspiration. Every time I came home, the difference screamed at me. Elena's bedroom was still intact, warm and full of color, while mine had been turned into a storage room once I left. By 25, I had earned a position at a respected marketing firm in Chicago. It wasn't glamorous. I started at the bottom, doing the grunt work no one else wanted, but it was mine. Every small step upward, every raise, every project, came from my own effort. I learned quickly that staying late meant opportunities, and so I made myself indispensable. Weekends blurred into weekdays. My friends joked that I lived at the office, but I didn't mind. Work became the place where effort equaled reward. Unlike at home, where no matter what I achieved, I remained invisible. When I finally signed the lease on my first apartment at 26, a tiny one-bedroom in a neighborhood just good enough to be safe, but still barely affordable, I stood in the empty living room and cried. Not because it was beautiful, it wasn't. The paint peeled in corners, the heater rattled in winter, and the bathroom sink dripped constantly. I cried because it was mine. Every dollar that paid for it came from my own sweat. I invited my parents to see it once. My mother wrinkled her nose at the size. "It's cozy," she said politely, scanning the small space as if she couldn't imagine living there herself. My father nodded, impressed only by the price I'd negotiated. Elena, who had tagged along, remarked casually, "It's cute for a starter place," as though her condo, funded by my parents' generous down payment, was somehow the standard by which mine should be measured. Still, I furnished the apartment piece by piece, bargain by bargain. A second-hand sofa I reupholstered myself, a chipped coffee table rescued from the curb, a bed frame I carried up 3 flights of stairs alone. Every item told a story of effort. It wasn't luxurious, but it was a sanctuary. At work, things were finally paying off too. I had built a reputation for handling the tough accounts, the clients who demanded endless revisions, the projects that others gave up on. My boss once told me, "You're the glue here, Bianca. You hold everything together." It was meant as a compliment, but to me it sounded like another version of what I had heard my whole life. Bianca can handle it. And I did handle it. Every late night, every impossible deadline, every piece of recognition that quietly went to someone else because they had better connections while I had only raw effort. Still, I told myself it would all balance out eventually. Hard work had to matter in the end. Sundays were the exception, the one day I left work behind and returned to my parents' house for dinner. It was tradition. Elena would already be there, her stories filling the room before I had even set down my coat. "I'm thinking of trying photography," she would say, or "My boss hinted at a promotion," or "I might travel to Europe next summer." Every detail was met with enthusiasm, questions, laughter. When my turn came, my mother would ask, "How's work?" but never wait for an answer. My father would nod, satisfied with the knowledge that I was still employed, still independent. That was enough for them. In those moments, I felt like a ghost at my own family table, present, but unseen. And yet, I kept going back. Partly for the comfort of a meal I didn't have to prepare, partly because some small part of me still hoped that one day they would notice me the way they noticed her. By the time I was 30, I had climbed higher at the firm, managing campaigns that appeared on billboards across the city. I passed them on my morning commute, a strange mixture of pride and emptiness swirling in my chest. No one knew the sleepless nights behind those glossy ads. No one knew the sacrifices. Birthdays missed, friendships neglected, relationships abandoned. But that was my life. Built on independence, sharpened by resilience, carried without anyone's hands to steady me. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were already forming, the exhaustion I ignored, the loneliness I numbed with endless work, the quiet bitterness that settled deeper each year. At the time, though, I believed I was exactly who I was supposed to be. Bianca, the reliable one. And so I kept building, brick by brick, believing my foundation was solid. I didn't know that a single shift, a layoff I never saw coming, would send it all crashing down. The day it all crumbled began like any other. I woke before dawn, brewed my usual bitter coffee, and walked the familiar streets to the train. The city was half asleep, headlights sliding across wet pavement, the cold air biting at my cheeks. At the office, I slipped into my desk as if nothing could ever change. By mid-morning, though, the atmosphere shifted. There was a meeting scheduled, mandatory, urgent. The kind of meeting that makes the whole floor fall silent. My stomach tightened before anyone said a word. We gathered in the conference room, the air thick with unease. The director cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. Restructuring, budget cuts, downsizing. Words that might as well have been gunshots. I sat frozen, a notebook open in front of me, pen resting between my fingers, though I wasn't writing. When he read my name from the list, it didn't feel real. My heart thudded loudly in my ears as he explained about severance pay, transition support, all the carefully rehearsed phrases meant to soften the blow. I barely heard any of it. All I could think was, after years of giving everything, I'm disposable. I nodded mechanically, gathered my belongings into a cardboard box, and walked out of the building I had once thought of as the center of my life. My hands trembled so badly that the stapler and notebooks rattled inside the box. I didn't cry, not then. My body knew how to hold everything in. But inside, something cracked. On the train ride home, I stared at my reflection in the window. I still looked like me, hair neatly tied back, blazer pressed, makeup flawless. I looked like someone who had control. No one on that train would have guessed that the world I built was unraveling. The severance pay lasted just enough for one more rent check and groceries. After that, every day became a battle. I sent out resumes until my fingers ached from typing. Cover letters, applications, networking emails, all swallowed into silence. When replies came, they were polite rejections, the same empty sentences repeated over and over. We appreciate your interest, but... Weeks passed. My savings shrank. I skipped dinners to stretch what little I had. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in tighter each night. I told myself it was temporary. That someone like me, someone dependable, hardworking, reliable, would find something soon. But each unopened email notification, each declined interview, scraped away at that belief. I tried to keep my routine intact. Every morning I dressed as if for work, sat at my desk with coffee, and opened job boards like they were lifelines. But no matter how polished my resume, no matter how carefully I rehearsed answers in the mirror, the world seemed to have no space for me. It wasn't just rejection, it was invisibility. I thought about calling my parents once, just once, but I could already hear the disappointment in my mother's sigh, the tight line of my father's mouth. They would ask why I hadn't planned better, why I hadn't saved more, why I wasn't stronger. And Elena, she would tilt her head with sympathy that felt like pity. The idea of their faces twisted in judgment was worse than the hunger gnawing at my stomach. So I told no one. I carried the burden alone, because that was the only way I knew how. The first of the month came again, and my bank account mocked me with its numbers. I couldn't cover the rent. My landlord was kind enough when I told him, but kindness doesn't pay bills. He gave me a week to move out, a week to dismantle the little sanctuary I had fought so hard to build. I packed my life into boxes, the walls of the apartment echoing with each piece of furniture I dragged away. I stared at the second-hand sofa, the table, the bed frame I had carried upstairs myself. They weren't just objects. They were proof of my independence, proof that I had built something from nothing, and now I was losing it all. I sold what I could. A few dollars for the coffee table, a bit more for the bed. It wasn't enough, but it kept me from total emptiness. The rest, I left behind. The night I turned in my keys, I lingered at the doorway, staring at the bare walls. I thought of the first night I had cried with joy in that space, the pride of belonging somewhere. Now it felt like a hollow shell. I whispered goodbye to no one in particular, locked the door, and walked away with only what I could fit into my car. The car became my refuge. I folded the back seats down, arranging my blankets into something that resembled a bed. I kept a small duffel bag with clothes, toiletries, and my laptop tucked neatly beside me. I told myself it would be temporary. A week, maybe 2. Just until a new job came through. But the days stretched on. Morning showers at the gym, afternoons spent hunched over a library computer, refreshing job sites, evenings parked in quiet corners of the city, praying no one would notice me. I didn't let the outside world see. My makeup was perfect, my clothes pressed. To everyone else, I was still Bianca, the capable one. But at night, lying in the cold silence of my car, I wondered if anyone truly knew me at all. For the first time in my life, I wasn't strong. I wasn't reliable. I wasn't enough to hold myself together. And the terrifying part was that no one noticed, because no one ever thought to look. The first night in my car was the longest night of my life. I parked in a dim corner of a grocery store lot, convinced every pair of headlights belonged to someone ready to tap on my window and ask what I was doing there. My body ached from curling across the back seat, my neck stiff from the uneven angle. I didn't sleep. I just drifted in and out, startled awake by every noise. By morning, I felt more exhausted than when I had laid down. But routine is a strange thing. With time, even the unacceptable can start to feel ordinary. I found places that felt safer to park, quiet residential streets, a church lot where no one seemed to notice, and once, an industrial park where the silence was absolute. I kept a mental map of bathrooms I could use without questions, the 24-hour coffee shops where I could sit unnoticed as long as I kept a cup on the table. The gym membership I had once considered a luxury became my lifeline. Every morning, I lined up before the doors opened, clutching my bag. Inside, I would shower quickly, wash my hair, apply makeup with careful precision, and step back out looking like nothing had changed. My reflection didn't betray me, but the woman in the mirror felt like a stranger, polished, composed, and yet hollow-eyed in ways no mascara could cover. Food was another calculation. I learned which fast food places offered dollar menu items that could stretch across 2 meals. I kept granola bars in the glove compartment, a bottle of water tucked between the seats. Hunger became something I measured, not solved. My laptop sat in the passenger seat like a partner in crime. Libraries were my offices now, their hum of fluorescent lights and quiet keystrokes my soundtrack. I sent resumes until my fingers cramped, tailoring each one, pretending each application was the one that would bring me back to solid ground. But rejections kept piling up. Sometimes I stared at the blank screen so long that words blurred together. Sundays became the cruelest part of the week. I drove to my parents' house, arriving at exactly 5 o'clock as I always had. My car smelled faintly of damp clothes and cheap food, but I rolled down the windows on the way there, blasting cold air to clear the evidence. By the time I walked up their driveway, I was immaculate. Clean dress, neat hair, a smile plastered firmly in place. Dinner looked the same as ever. Elena's stories filled the air, my parents hung on her every word, and when it was my turn, the questions were perfunctory. "How's work?" they asked, not waiting for a real answer. I played along, spinning tales about projects, colleagues, deadlines that didn't exist anymore. The lies slid easily from my tongue. The cruelest part wasn't that they didn't notice the truth. It was that they never even looked closely enough to wonder. I wanted to scream sometimes, to pound my fists on the table and shout, "Don't you see me? Don't you notice anything at all?" But instead, I smiled. I ate. I left as soon as dessert was finished, retreating back to the silence of my car. 6 weeks passed this way, 6 weeks of holding my life together with fragile threads. Each day began with the pretense of normalcy and ended with me folding blankets over stiff car seats. Each night I told myself it was temporary, that tomorrow might bring a phone call, an offer, a way out. But tomorrow kept looking exactly like today. The loneliness was the heaviest weight. It sat on my chest at night, pressing down harder than the cold air. I thought about reaching out to friends, but what would I say? "Hi, remember me? The reliable one? The woman who seemed like she had it all together? I'm actually living in my car now." I couldn't bear the image of their pitying eyes. I found myself talking to no one, whispering thoughts into the empty space of the car, as if saying them aloud would make me feel less invisible. Sometimes I laughed bitterly at myself, other times I cried silently, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Yet, Even as I unraveled inside, the mask stayed intact. To the world, I was still Bianca, the professional, the dependable, the strong. And perhaps that was the cruelest part of all. I had become so skilled at pretending that no one could tell I was falling apart. One night, as rain tapped against the windshield, I lay awake and realized something that chilled me to the bone. If I disappeared tomorrow, if my car was found empty on the side of the road, it might take weeks before anyone in my family noticed. Maybe longer. The thought hollowed me out in ways hunger never could. And still, I carried on. Because what choice did I have? I had been trained my whole life to survive alone, to endure without complaint, to keep moving no matter the weight. So that's what I did. I survived. But surviving isn't the same as living. And deep down, I knew that sooner or later, something would break. By the sixth Sunday, I was running on fumes. My car smelled faintly of damp clothes, my bank account was nearly empty, and I'd begun skipping more meals than I admitted even to myself. But still, I drove to my parents' house right on time, as though nothing was wrong. When I walked through the door, my mother barely glanced up from the kitchen. "You're here," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Elena just called. She's running late." Of course she was. Elena could arrive an hour past dinner and still be met with laughter and indulgence. If I ever dared to show up late, I'd be lectured about respect for other people's time. The smell of roasted chicken drifted through the air. Not my favorite meal, of course. It never was. It was Elena's. My mother had made her favorite dishes for 30 years, as if the rest of us didn't have preferences worth remembering. I carried a small bouquet of daisies I had bought with my last few dollars, placing them carefully on the counter. My mother nodded politely before turning back to the stove. My father was in the living room, already engrossed in the television, acknowledging me with a distracted grunt. I told myself to swallow the bitterness, as I always did, to play the role, smile, eat, and leave before anyone looked too closely. But that night, something inside me was restless, like a fault line ready to crack. When Elena finally arrived, the energy shifted instantly. My father muted the TV. My mother lit up as though sunshine had just entered the house. My sister breezed in with her usual effortless charm, talking about traffic, about work, about her plans for the week. We sat down at the table, and just as expected, the conversation revolved around her. Her new responsibilities at work, her latest photography class, the funny thing her coworker had said. I pushed food around my plate, the weight in my chest growing heavier with every passing minute. Then my mother cleared her throat. "Elena has some news," she said brightly. Elena looked hesitant. "It's nothing major." "Of course it's major," my mother interrupted, patting her hand. "Mark and Elena broke up. He's keeping the apartment, so she'll need a new place for a little while." I froze. My father chuckled lightly, as though it was all perfectly simple. "We thought, since you've got that extra space in your apartment, Bianca, Elena could stay with you, just until she finds her own place." It was like being punched in the chest. They still thought I was in that apartment, still thought my life was intact, even after 6 weeks of me arriving at their house in the same carefully chosen dresses, hiding the circles under my eyes with makeup, smiling through clenched teeth. My mother went on, oblivious. "It would only be temporary, sweetheart. A month or two, at most. Family helps family." The words rang in my ears. Family helps family. I set down my fork slowly, my hands trembling despite my effort to stay steady. My heart hammered so loudly I thought they must be able to hear it. Finally, I said it. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "That's funny," I murmured, "because I haven't lived there for 6 weeks." The room fell silent. The clink of silverware against plates stopped, the laughter evaporated. My father's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I met his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. "I lost my job. I couldn't pay rent. I had to give up the apartment." My mother's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. "Where have you been staying?" Her voice cracked, more horror than concern. I swallowed hard. The words tasted bitter, but there was no holding them back now. "In my car." Elena gasped softly. My father leaned back in his chair, face darkening. "That's ridiculous," he barked. "Why wouldn't you come here? Why would you let it get that bad?" And just like that, years of silence, years of swallowing pain came flooding to the surface. "Because this hasn't been my home for a long time," I said, my voice shaking now with rage I couldn't contain. "Because not once in the past decade have you treated me like someone you could support. You've treated me like a safety net for everyone else, but never as someone who might need one." My mother pressed a hand to her chest, tears already pooling. "That's not fair. We've always supported both of you." I laughed, sharp and hollow. "Supported? You covered Elena's bills until she was nearly 30. You gave her money for her condo. You made excuses when she stumbled. And me? I worked through college, buried myself in debt, and you told everyone how proud you were that I did it alone. That's not pride. It's neglect, dressed as praise." My father's fists clenched on the table. "You never asked for help." "No," I snapped, "because I learned early on that if I did, I'd be met with disappointment instead of support. Do you have any idea what it's like to sit at this table every week, listening to Elena's every move celebrated, while you never once asked how I was really doing?" Elena shifted uncomfortably. "Bianca, that's not—" "Don't!" I cut her off, my eyes burning. "This isn't about you. It's about the fact that I was drowning for weeks, and no one even noticed. You all looked right at me and saw what you wanted to see, the strong one, the reliable one, the daughter who doesn't need anything. But I did. I still do." My mother was crying openly now, whispering, "We didn't know. We didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," I said, my voice breaking. "You didn't know because you never looked." The silence that followed was deafening. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. My chest felt tight, my hands still trembling, but for the first time, I wasn't swallowing the words. "I need some air," I muttered, standing. "Don't you walk away from this table," my father ordered, his voice sharp with authority. I turned back to him, meeting his eyes one last time. "I'm 32 years old. You don't get to order me anymore. And you don't get to pretend this is a home when it never was." Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my coat, walked out the front door, and stepped into the cool night air. My car waited in the driveway, my only real shelter. I climbed inside, slammed the door shut, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself sob. The mask was gone, the truth was out, and there was no going back. The week after that dinner was a blur of silence and ringing phones. My mother called 3 times a day, her voicemails a mix of sobbing guilt and sharp commands to come home. My father's messages were shorter, angrier. "Stop this nonsense, you're making us look bad." And Elena. Hers were the hardest to hear. Gentle words, quiet questions, her voice soft in ways I wasn't used to. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I let the calls pile up, the text notifications buzzing like angry bees on my phone. I didn't know what to say anymore. I had cracked open the truth, and their responses proved everything I already suspected. They cared more about control, about appearances, than about the fact that their daughter was sleeping in a car. And so, I retreated further. I parked on streets where no one knew me, wrapped myself in the same blanket each night, and prayed the temperatures wouldn't dip too low. Sleep came in restless snatches, interrupted by headlights or the rattle of footsteps on sidewalks. The hunger was worse now. My last few dollars dwindled until even the dollar menu meals became impossible. I stretched packets of instant oatmeal stolen from the office break room weeks before, mixing them with hot water from gas station machines. Some days, I ate nothing at all. But nothing compared to the storm. It was late, close to 2 in the morning, when the sky opened up and rain hammered against the roof of my car. I was parked in a side street I thought was safe, lulled by the quiet. Within minutes, water began to pool around the tires. I sat upright, alarm slicing through my exhaustion. By the time I tried to start the engine and move, it was too late. The street had flooded faster than I could have imagined. Water seeped in through the doors, soaking the blanket, the duffel bag at my feet, even the folder of documents I kept hidden under the seat. The car sputtered, coughed, and died. I scrambled out into knee-deep water, clutching my laptop and phone against my chest. Rain soaked me instantly, icy and merciless. I stood on the sidewalk, watching helplessly as water rose inside the car, lifting what little I had left and swallowing it whole. My home, my last refuge, was drowning in front of me. I don't know how long I stood there, shivering and numb, before I forced myself to move. I wandered through the downpour until I found an all-night laundromat. Inside, the hum of machines and the faint smell of detergent surrounded me. I sat in a plastic chair, dripping wet, clutching my laptop like it was the only piece of myself I still owned. That night, I felt the bottom give way. When dawn came, I walked back to the car. The water had receded, but the damage was clear. The seats were soaked, the engine dead. My clothes, my toiletries, the few photographs I'd saved, they were ruined. Insurance might cover something eventually, but eventually meant weeks, maybe months. I didn't have that kind of time. I sat on the curb beside the car, staring at it with hollow eyes. It wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It had been my shelter, my bedroom, my last shred of independence. And now it was gone. For the first time, the word I had avoided crashed into me with full weight. Homeless. I whispered it aloud, the sound foreign on my tongue. I'm homeless. Tears stung my eyes, hot and unrelenting. I thought about how many years I had fought to stand on my own feet, how I had worked through college, climbed through the ranks at work, paid for every piece of my life myself. And still, here I was, sitting on a wet curb with nothing. It wasn't just about losing the car. It was about losing the illusion I had clung to, that I could still handle everything, that this was temporary, that I was still in control. The mask had cracked at that dinner, but now it shattered completely. I didn't know where to go. With no car, I couldn't even pretend anymore. No safe spot to park, no locked doors to shield me from the world. For the first time, I felt utterly exposed. As the sun rose higher, I forced myself to walk. My clothes were still damp, my shoes squelching with each step. I carried my laptop bag like a lifeline, though it felt heavier than ever. I wandered aimlessly until I reached a small park. I collapsed onto a bench, exhaustion pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't fight. Hours blurred together. People walked their dogs, children played, joggers passed by, and I sat there, invisible to all of them. When the sky darkened again, an officer approached. A woman, tall, with kind but cautious eyes. "Ma'am, the park closes soon. You can't stay here overnight." I wanted to brush her off, to stand and walk away with my usual practiced dignity. But I couldn't. My body felt too heavy, my spirit too broken. She studied me for a moment, her voice softening. "Do you have somewhere to go?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Her expression shifted. Not pity, not judgment, but something else. Understanding, maybe. "There's a shelter nearby," she said gently. "I can call to see if they have space." For a moment, pride clawed at me again. The old instinct to say no, to insist I could handle it. But the words wouldn't come. I was too tired. Too empty. "Yes," I whispered finally. "Please." That single word, please, felt heavier than anything I had ever spoken. And just like that, the last piece of my armor crumbled. The police officer's name was Bryant. She didn't talk much on the drive, and I was grateful for that. I sat in the passenger seat of her cruiser, damp clothes clinging to my skin, staring out the window at a city that felt foreign. Each building we passed looked like it belonged to another world, one where people went home to warm lights and beds, not to the empty exhaustion that had become my life. We pulled up to a plain brick building with a small sign out front, New Beginnings Women's Shelter. The name almost made me laugh. A new beginning felt impossible. I wasn't starting anything. I was ending. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A woman at the desk looked up as Officer Bryant introduced me. Her name was Lucia. She had kind eyes, steady and calm, the kind that saw more than you wanted her to. "Come on, sweetheart," she said gently. "Let's get you checked in." Her voice broke something open in me. It had been weeks since anyone had spoken to me like that, without judgment, without expectation, just simple care. I felt tears prick my eyes again, but I blinked them back, Unwilling to fall apart in front of strangers, Lucia asked questions in a soft, practiced tone. My name, my age, whether I had family I could call. That last question nearly unraveled me. I managed to shake my head, mumbling something about complicated circumstances. She nodded as if she understood more than I'd said, and didn't press further. She handed me a towel, a set of toiletries in a plastic bag, and clothes that smelled faintly of laundry detergent. We don't have much, but it's clean and safe, she said, guiding me down a hallway. The room she showed me held 4 beds, 2 already occupied by women who glanced up briefly before turning back to their own worlds. One hummed softly as she folded clothes into neat stacks. The other stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. I set my bag down on the remaining bed, the springs creaking as I sat. It wasn't private, it wasn't mine, but it was dry. For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to listen for footsteps outside a car window. That night, lying on a thin mattress under fluorescent light, I felt an overwhelming mix of relief and shame. Relief because I wasn't alone in the dark anymore. Shame because admitting I needed this place meant admitting I couldn't do it all myself. The next morning, a social worker named Diane sat with me at a small table, her clipboard resting lightly in her lap. She asked about my background, my work history, what had brought me here. For once, I didn't dress my answers in pride. I told her the truth. The layoff, the apartment I lost, the weeks in my car, the storm that destroyed what little I had left. Diane listened without interruption. When I finished, she looked at me with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. Bianca, you're not broken. You've had a setback. With your skills and experience, this doesn't have to define you. But it does have to teach you something. No one survives alone forever. Her words stung because they were true. I had spent my entire life surviving alone, convinced it was proof of strength. Now here I was, surrounded by women who had learned the same lesson in different ways. Over the days that followed, I began to meet them. Maria, who had left her home in the middle of the night with nothing but her children and a bruised face. Tanya, whose untreated mental illness had spiraled until she lost her job and then her apartment. Eleanor, an older woman with soft white hair who had lived on a fixed income until rent outpaced her pension. Each story was a mirror reflecting pieces of my own, and also a reminder of my privilege. I had education, work experience, a body that was healthy enough to keep me going. My homelessness was born of pride and bad luck. Theirs came from cycles of abuse, neglect, or systemic failure. It humbled me. Evenings at the shelter were filled with small sounds, laughter from women sharing stories, children chasing each other down the hallway, the hum of television in the common room. I joined hesitantly, at first keeping to myself. But slowly I found myself listening, then speaking. There was something healing in being among people who didn't ask me to be strong, who didn't expect me to have all the answers. Lucia often checked in, her presence steady and reassuring. One night, she found me sitting alone by the window. "You look like someone carrying too much," she said softly. I wanted to deny it, to pretend I was fine, but the words caught in my throat. I thought I was better than this," I admitted. She shook her head gently. "This isn't about better or worse. Life doesn't care about those categories. What matters is what you do now. Do you let this define you, or do you let it reshape you?" Her words sank deep. For so long, I had clung to the idea that strength meant never falling, but maybe real strength was in admitting when you had. The first night I slept without waking every hour to check my surroundings, I dreamed. Not of success, not of promotions or independence, but of safety. It startled me to realize how long it had been since I felt safe. Days became weeks. Diane helped me file for emergency assistance and connect with job placement programs. I attended workshops on budgeting, on rebuilding credit, on interview skills, though I already knew most of it. Still, I forced myself to participate. I needed to practice humility, to remember that being capable didn't mean being incapable of learning. The shelter wasn't home, not really, but it gave me something I hadn't had in months: stability, a bed to sleep in, meals I didn't have to ration, people who looked me in the eye and saw a person, not just a mask. And slowly, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to live again, even if it was in the humblest of places. I had been at New Beginnings for nearly 2 weeks when Lucia came to find me in the common room. I was hunched over a laptop, filling out yet another job application, when she touched my shoulder lightly. "Bianca," she said, her tone unreadable. "You have a visitor." My heart stuttered. A visitor? I hadn't told anyone where I was staying. My first thought was Officer Bryant checking in, but when I followed Lucia down the hall and into the reception area, I froze. Elena stood there, looking out of place in her designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her nails painted a flawless shade of red. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She shifted from foot to foot, nervous in a way I rarely saw. How did you find me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a step closer. "I've been looking everywhere. I called hospitals, police stations. Finally, Officer Bryant told me you might be here. She wasn't supposed to, but she could tell I wasn't going to stop searching. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to walk away, to slam the door between us and protect myself from more disappointment. Another part of me, some small, broken part, ached at the sight of her, standing there like someone who had lost her way. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just maybe grab a coffee? No pressure." I hesitated, my chest tightening. The thought of sitting across from her, of pretending everything was fine, made my stomach twist. But something in her eyes stopped me, an uncertainty I'd never seen before. So I nodded. We walked in silence to a cafe 2 blocks away. She paid for our drinks without asking, sliding a latte across the table to me. For a long time, we sat without speaking, the steam curling between us. Finally, she broke the silence. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm here," she admitted. "They think I'm at work." "Why the secrecy?" I asked flatly. "Because I wanted to talk to you without their voices in the middle. They're a mess. Mom cries constantly. Dad's furious but won't admit he's scared. They keep trying to figure out where you are, but it never crossed their minds you might be in a shelter." She bit her lip. "It never crossed mine either. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten." Her words stung, but I forced myself to hold her gaze. "Why would you realize? You've never had to. They've always caught you before you could fall." She flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "You always had a cushion. I didn't. You called them when you needed money, when you were in trouble, when you couldn't figure things out. I learned not to bother." Elena looked down at her coffee, tracing the rim with one manicured finger. "I didn't think about it that way," she said softly. I thought that's what parents do. They help when you need them." I let out a bitter laugh. "For you, maybe." Her eyes filled with tears, and for once, they didn't look like manipulation. They looked real. "I'm sorry, Bianca. I never saw it. I never realized how different it was for you. I just thought you didn't need anyone. You always looked so put together, so untouchable. I admired you." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the Elena I had known, the one who soaked up attention without noticing it starved me, with the woman sitting across from me now, vulnerable and apologetic. "What happened to your car?" she asked suddenly. "Mom mentioned something about a storm." I explained haltingly about the flood, about losing everything in a single night. As I spoke, I realized this was the first time I had told anyone the whole story without editing it to sound less desperate. She listened, her face stricken, and when I finished, she shook her head. "That's awful. I can't believe you went through all of that alone." She hesitated, then added, "I have an idea, but you have to promise not to shoot it down immediately." I narrowed my eyes. "What?" "Come stay with me." I blinked. "You don't have a place. You broke up with Mark. That's why Mom and Dad were pushing you toward me in the first place." Color rose in her cheeks. "That's what they think. The truth is, I never lived with Mark. We dated, sure, but he never wanted to move in. When we broke up, it was easier to let mom and dad assume I'd been staying with him than admit the truth. I've actually had my own apartment in Wicker Park for 3 months. It's small, just a studio, but the couch pulls out. You could stay there until you get back on your feet. I stared at her, stunned. You lied to them. She gave a humorless laugh. Seems like dishonesty runs in the family. You didn't tell them you were homeless. I didn't tell them I was living alone. Maybe we're both guilty. The corner of my mouth twitched despite myself. She wasn't wrong, but my pride rose up immediately. I don't want your charity, Elena. It's not charity, she said quickly. It's family. Real family. Not the roles we've been stuck in all these years, but us. Me helping you because I want to, not because anyone told me to. She reached across the table, her hand tentative on mine. Please, let me do this. I studied her hand, her face, the rawness in her voice. For years we had been competitors in a game neither of us had chosen, one adored, the other overlooked. But in that moment, I saw something different. A sister reaching out, trying to build a bridge across the gulf between us. Slowly, I nodded. Okay, but only temporary. And I'll contribute as soon as I can. Her relief was immediate, her smile genuine. Of course, totally temporary. But I'm glad you said yes. That afternoon, I returned to New Beginnings, gathered my few belongings, and hugged Lucia tightly. Thank you, I whispered, my throat thick. She smiled knowingly. New beginnings come in many forms. This one looks like your sister. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that maybe she was right. Moving into Elena's apartment felt surreal. Her place was small, barely enough for one person, let alone two, but to me, it felt like a palace compared to the shelter. The walls were painted a soft gray, the furniture mismatched but cozy, and plants perched on the windowsills as if soaking up every inch of light. She showed me the couch with a sheepish smile. It's not the Ritz, she said, tugging at the cushions, but it pulls out. I lowered myself onto it, running a hand over the fabric. You don't know how good this feels, I murmured. After weeks of car seats and thin shelter mattresses, even this lumpy pullout felt like heaven. That first night, I lay awake listening to the soft hum of the fridge, the creaks of the building settling. Elena's gentle breathing from the other side of the room was strangely comforting. We had spent most of our lives as rivals, orbiting the same parents who set us against each other. Now, here we were, two grown women in a cramped apartment, learning how to coexist. At first, it was awkward. She left dishes in the sink longer than I liked. I woke earlier than she did and made too much noise in the kitchen. We danced around each other, careful not to trip over old wounds. But slowly, the tension eased. Evenings became our time, sharing takeout, watching shows we'd never admit to liking, laughing in ways we hadn't since childhood. For the first time, I saw Elena outside the lens of favoritism. Without our parents watching, she wasn't the golden child. She was just a woman, messy, insecure, funny, and surprisingly thoughtful. She admitted that their constant hovering had left her feeling smothered, incapable of making decisions without second-guessing herself. It's like they kept me in bubble wrap, she said one night, curling her legs under her. I thought it was love, but it was also a cage. Her words stunned me. All those years I had envied her, resented her. But now I realized she had been trapped in her own way. We were both products of the same imbalance, just shaped differently by it. It didn't erase my anger, but it softened it. Then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, as I was reviewing yet another rejection email on my laptop, Elena said casually, "By the way, I talked to a friend of mine, Sarah. She's the creative director at Digital Edge Marketing. She mentioned they're looking for someone with campaign experience. I told her about you, and she wants your resume." I nearly dropped my laptop. "You what?" She shrugged, smiling shyly. "I figured it couldn't hurt. You're brilliant, Bianca. Someone just needs to see it." The next week, I interviewed at Digital Edge. For the first time in months, I felt like I was breathing again. Sarah was sharp, straightforward, and genuinely impressed with my portfolio. She asked questions that made me feel alive, like my brain was finally being stretched again after so long in survival mode. 2 days later, I got the call. I was hired. When I hung up, I turned to Elena, who was perched on the couch scrolling through her phone. "I got it," I whispered, hardly able to believe it myself. She dropped the phone and squealed, throwing her arms around me. For a second, I let myself melt into her hug. The bitterness between us hadn't disappeared, but in that moment, gratitude drowned out everything else. Working again felt like stepping into sunlight after months underground. The office buzzed with creativity, the projects exciting, the culture supportive in ways my old firm had never been. I still carried the scars of what I'd been through, but they fueled me. I worked hard, but not with the same desperation as before. This time, I allowed myself to breathe. With my first paycheck, I insisted on contributing to Elena's rent and groceries. She tried to wave me off, but I refused. "This is temporary, remember?" I reminded her. "And I need to stand on my own again." She grinned. "Fine, but don't expect me to stop stealing your clothes." Despite the occasional sibling squabble, her leaving lights on, me being too obsessive about cleaning, we found a rhythm. We started having sister nights, where we cooked together or watched bad reality TV, laughing until our stomachs hurt. For the first time, our relationship wasn't built on competition or comparison, it was real. Still, I couldn't ignore the silence from our parents. Weeks had passed with only occasional texts from my mother, her words swinging between guilt and accusation. "We just want to know you're safe," followed by, "I can't believe you're doing this to us." My father sent nothing at all. Elena saw the toll it took on me. "You don't have to face them yet," she said gently one evening. "Not until you're ready, but when you do, I'll be there." Her support steadied me in ways I never expected. We weren't perfect. There were still jagged edges between us, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a sister, not a rival. Months slipped by. My savings account slowly grew. My confidence returned. The pull-out couch began to feel less like charity and more like a stepping stone. And with every passing day, I felt myself stitching back together, not as the version of Bianca my parents had defined, but as the woman I was finally choosing to be. The night I sat at the kitchen counter with Elena, laughing over cheap wine and greasy pizza, I realized something startling. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. And maybe, just maybe, rebuilding. 6 months after I first carried my suitcase into Elena's apartment, I stood in front of a new door. My door. The keys jingled in my trembling hand as I unlocked it for the first time. The apartment wasn't fancy. A one-bedroom on the edge of the city, smaller than the one I had before, with creaky floors and a balcony that overlooked more brick than skyline. But when I stepped inside, I felt something surge in my chest. Pride. I ran my hand along the wall, the paint cool beneath my fingers. This space was mine, paid for with money I had earned at my new job. Not survival money, not desperation money, real money from work that valued me. Every dollar had meaning. Every corner of this apartment a quiet reminder that I had built again, brick by brick. Elena helped me move in, lugging boxes up the narrow stairs while teasing, "Don't get too comfortable, you're going to miss me nagging you about the bathroom." I laughed, setting a box on the kitchen counter. "Trust me, I'll manage." But the truth was, I would miss her. Our time together had changed us both. For the first time, we weren't competing for scraps of attention. We were choosing each other, building something sisterly that had been denied to us for so long. We made a promise that night. Weekly sister nights, alternating between our apartments. Just us. No parents, no roles, no old baggage. But the shadow of my parents lingered. I hadn't seen them since the dinner where everything unraveled. Messages had slowed to a trickle, though every so often, my mother sent texts filled with guilt. "I think about you every day. We just want our family back. Please call me." My father was mostly silent, but when he did write, it was blunt. "You're stubborn, just like me." It would have been easier to keep ignoring them, to close the door on decades of imbalance, to live in the peace of my own hard-won freedom. But therapy had taught me that avoidance wasn't healing, it was hiding. And I was done hiding. So one Saturday afternoon, I sent a message. Dinner. My place. Just us. The day they arrived, my chest ached with nerves. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes rimmed red as if she hadn't stopped crying since that night. My father's posture was less rigid, his usual authority tempered by something almost vulnerable. We sat at my little table, the three of us, plates of pasta steaming between us. The silence was heavy, broken only when my mother whispered, "You look well." I nodded. "I am. I'm working again. I have a home." I let the words hang there, deliberate. A home. Not theirs, not borrowed, not temporary. Mine. My father cleared his throat. "We've missed you." I met his gaze. "You missed the version of me who never needed anything. The truth is, I did need you. For years. And you weren't there." My mother's lip trembled. "We thought we were doing right. We thought you were stronger." "I was strong," I said quietly. "But strength without support isn't strength. It's isolation." And it nearly broke me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. My father reached for her hand, his own eyes wet. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. "We failed you," he admitted, voice rough. "Not because we didn't love you, but because we didn't know how to love you properly. We gave Elena too much. We gave you too little. And I don't know if we can ever fix that." The words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had wanted acknowledgement, some sign they saw the truth. Now here it was, raw and imperfect, but real. "I don't need you to fix the past," I said after a long silence. "But if we're going to have a future, it has to be honest. I won't keep playing the role of the strong one while Elena stays the fragile one. We're adults now. If you want me in your lives, you'll have to know me as I am, not as the daughter you decided I had to be." My mother reached across the table, hesitating. For the first time, I let her take my hand. "We'll try," she whispered. "We don't want to lose you again." I squeezed her fingers lightly. "Then don't. Just see me. That's all I've ever wanted." The rest of the dinner was quiet but gentler, sprinkled with cautious attempts at conversation. They asked about my work, my apartment, my life, questions that felt tentative but genuine. It wasn't a magical reunion. It was awkward, fragile, full of tension. But it was something new, the beginning of honesty. After they left, I stood alone in my apartment, looking around at the boxes half unpacked, the curtains still in their plastic wrapping. For once, the incompleteness didn't bother me. Life wasn't neat. It wasn't supposed to be. I thought back to the girl who washed dishes at 8 years old, to the young woman who worked 3 jobs through college, to the 32-year-old who cried alone in a car. I carried them all with me. But they didn't define me anymore. I wasn't just the dependable one, or the invisible one, or the survivor. I was Bianca, messy, flawed, worthy. Enough. I walked to the balcony and leaned on the railing, the city humming beneath me. The wind was cool against my face, the night alive with distant sirens and laughter. For the first time in years, I felt not like an outsider looking in, but like someone finally standing in her own life. It wasn't perfect. My parents would stumble again. Elena and I would argue. I would face setbacks at work, bills that stretched too far, nights of doubt. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I knew now that strength wasn't silence. It wasn't carrying everything alone. Strength was allowing myself to be seen. Strength was saying, "I can't do this by myself," and letting others step in. Strength was rebuilding, not the mask I once wore, but the life I actually wanted. As I stood there, breathing in the cool night air, a thought came to me, clear and steady. I had fallen, yes. But I had risen too. And for the first time, I wasn't rising for anyone else's approval. I was rising for me. And that, I realized, was enough.